Ever find yourself like really clinging to a belief,
Yeah.
you know? Even when it feels like maybe, just maybe, it doesn't quite line up with reality.
Oh, absolutely. We've all been there. It's like that stubborn little voice inside just refuses to let go.
It's wild, right? Or
Mm.
how about this? Have you ever been in a group, everyone's all fired up, agreeing on some, well, let's just say questionable ideas? Ideas that if you were by yourself, you'd probably be like, nah, not buying it.
That's the classic groupthink scenario. It's amazing how the dynamics of a group can influence our individual perspectives.
It's crazy. So today we're going deep, deep, deep into some fascinating psychological theories that try to explain this stuff. And our trusty guide for this deep dive is 30-Second Psychology. This book is packed with insights, and we're going to try to unpack some of the biggies about how we form those rock-solid beliefs and navigate the sometimes bizarre world of group dynamics.
It's all about understanding ourselves better, right? Why we do the things we do, why we believe the things we believe.
Yeah, exactly. So first up, let's tackle this whole belief thing. And there's this classic experiment, Festinger's boring task experiment from way back in 1959.
Oh, yeah, the one with the pegs. Can you imagine? They had people literally turning pegs on a board for an hour. Talk about
Mhm.
mind-numbing.
Seriously, an hour of that. I'd be begging for a Sudoku puzzle by minute 10. But here's the kicker. After this snooze fest of an experiment, Festinger and his buddy Carl Smith offered some of the students $1 and others a whole 20 bucks to tell the next person waiting that the task was, get this, super fun and engaging.
The ultimate test of persuasive powers.
Right. You'd think the $20 folks would lay it on thick, but guess what? When everyone later rated how much they actually enjoyed the task, the $1 group said they had way more fun. What the heck is that about?
That, my friend, is the beauty of cognitive dissonance. The idea is that these folks felt this like internal conflict, right? Because their actions saying the task was fun totally clashed with their actual experience, which was, boredom central.
Okay, so the $20 crew could justify their little white lie. They're like, hey, 20 bucks for a few fibs, not bad.
Hmm.
But that measly dollar, not so easy to brush off.
Exactly. The $20 was enough to smooth over any internal discomfort, but the $1 group, they had to find a way to make sense of why they'd do that for basically nothing. So, their brains did a little switcheroo, convincing themselves that maybe, just maybe, the task wasn't that awful after all.
It's like our brains are little con artists, huh? Just twisting reality to make us feel better about our choices. I totally do this with clothes, by the way. Remember that time I bought those shoes online?
The ones that looked fabulous but felt like walking on hot coals.
Those are the ones. They were so expensive, though, that I spent weeks pretending they were breaking in when really my feet were begging for mercy. Classic cognitive dissonance.
It's a tale as old as time. And this whole idea of internal consistency, it pops up again with how we behave in groups. That brings us to, drumroll please, groupthink.
Groupthink. Sounds kind of cozy, doesn't it? Like a bunch of pals just brainstorming up a storm. But it can get, well, a little messy, can it?
Oh, it can be downright dangerous. We're talking about situations where a group of people, often isolated from other perspectives, end up making really bad decisions because they prioritize harmony and consensus over, actual critical thinking.
It's like everyone's so afraid to rock the boat that they just go along with whatever, even if deep down they're thinking, this is a recipe for disaster.
Exactly. And there are some really chilling examples of this playing out in history, like the Challenger space shuttle disaster, for instance.
The one where the O-rings failed.
Mm-hmm.
Wasn't that partly because of some serious concerns that got swept under the rug?
That's right. There were engineers who raised red flags about launching in those super cold temperatures, but their concerns weren't given enough weight. The pressure to launch, tied to all sorts of national pride and NASA's reputation, was just too strong. It's a heartbreaking example of how groupthink, especially in high-pressure situations, can have devastating consequences.
It's pretty scary stuff. And speaking of high stakes, 30-second psychology also mentions the intelligence community's assumptions about Saddam Hussein's weapons of mass destruction before the Iraq War. Apparently, that whole thing was a major case of groupthink gone wrong.
It was. Even Pat Roberts, who chaired the Senate Intelligence Committee at the time, admitted that groupthink led them to misinterpret ambiguous evidence as, quote, conclusive evidence. It shows how this desire for a unified narrative can lead a group to cherry-pick information, ignoring anything that contradicts their shared assumptions.
So it's like those dissenting voices, those crucial bits of information that might challenge the group's cozy little bubble.
Yeah,
They just get tuned out.
they do. The pressure to conform can be immense, and questioning the group consensus can feel almost impossible. I bet we've all experienced a milder version of this at some point, right? Like, remember that time in college when our study group totally bombed that presentation?
Oh, yeah. We just went with the first idea someone threw out there. I had this nagging feeling it was going to tank, but I didn't want to cause a fuss.
It happens. Understanding groupthink helps us spot those situations, those red flags, and hopefully encourages us to speak up, to push for more critical thinking, even when it's uncomfortable.
Absolutely. Okay, shifting gears a bit, let's talk about why we even form these strong attachments to groups in the first place. 30-second psychology touches on Henri Tajfel's social identity theory, which seems to get at the root of this whole us versus them thing.
Tajfel's work is so insightful, and it's deeply connected to his personal experiences. He was a prisoner of war during World War II, so he knew firsthand the power of group categorization, how it can be used to dehumanize and divide.
Like we have this primal need to belong, right? So we categorize ourselves and others into different groups and then almost instinctively start favoring our own little in-group.
Exactly. And the crazy thing is, it doesn't even have to be a meaningful group. Tajfel did these experiments where he divided people based on totally random stuff, like which artists they preferred or even just flipping a coin.
Seriously. Like heads, you're on team A, tails, you're on team B, and suddenly people are acting like they're sworn rivals.
That's the gist of it. Even with these completely arbitrary groups, people showed favoritism towards their own in-group. It's like we're wired for tribalism no matter how flimsy the basis for the tribe.
Wow. That makes you wonder about how we choose leaders then. Does our in-group bias play into that too? Our book mentions some research by Michael Hogg that explores that very question.
It does. Hogg's research suggests that groups tend to pick leaders who are, how do I put this, the most typical members. Those who really embody the group's shared characteristics and values.
Well, not necessarily the most qualified or the most visionary, but the one who's the most like
Yeah,
everyone else.
that's the surprising part. It's about shared identity, feeling like the leader is one of us, more than objective skills or experience. And once these leaders are in power, they have to keep reinforcing that shared identity.
Ah, so it's like they're constantly reassuring their followers, hey, I haven't gone all fancy pants on you. I'm still your average Joe, even though I'm calling the shots now.
Precisely. And this is where things can get a bit, shall we say, politically charged. 30-second psychology talks about how this need to maintain in-group solidarity might explain the effectiveness of, well, some less than inclusive tactics.
Like those slogans and speeches that constantly draw lines between us and them. It's all about rallying the base by defining who's not part of the club.
It's a powerful strategy. By emphasizing the differences between the in-group and the out-group, leaders can solidify their position and create a strong sense of unity among their followers. But it can obviously have some pretty nasty side effects when it comes to prejudice and discrimination.
It's kind of mind-blowing to think about how these deep-seated psychological forces can play out on such a huge scale. Suddenly, those political campaigns that harp on us versus them seem a lot less random and a lot more strategic.
It's all about tapping into those fundamental aspects of human psychology, understanding how our need to belong and our perception of group identity can be used to influence our beliefs and behaviors.
So let's wrap this up. We've covered a lot of ground here. We've explored how our brains can twist reality to maintain a sense of internal consistency, how the desire for group harmony can lead to some really bad decisions, and how our need to belong shapes our perception of leaders and fuels that whole in-group versus out-group dynamic.
It's a whirlwind tour of the human psyche.
It is. And it leaves us with some pretty big questions to ponder, like, are there times when you might be clinging to a belief just to avoid that cognitive dissonance? Are you part of any groups where maybe, just maybe, groupthink is creeping in? And are you now hyper aware of how leaders might be using that us versus them tactic?
These are questions we should all be asking ourselves. By understanding these psychological forces, we can be more mindful of our own biases, make more informed decisions, and maybe even create groups and communities that are a little more open, a little more critical, and a lot less susceptible to those less savory group dynamics.
Food for thought, for sure. This has been quite a deep dive, and I hope you all learned something new about yourselves along the way. Until next time, keep those brains buzzing and don't be afraid to challenge the status quo.
Stay curious, everyone.